Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to my review of the Phoibos Narwhal. A brand that is well known for having a giant octopus on the dial is today doubling down on the marine theme for their latest dive watch by naming it after a seal with a giant toothpick stuck to its forehead. Or at least that's what it looks like to me. A slightly odd choice of name as it doesn't really have much of a connection to a very 1970s style diver. Now you saw the pop-up. This video is sponsored by Phoibos. I will therefore leave a link to this watch in the description of the video on their website. I'll also leave a discount code JOHNWA10 getting you 10% off this Narwhal or anything else you'd like on the PhoibosWatch.com international website. Phoibos now have a fair range of watches in their catalogue and in a fair range of sizes too. From the smaller ladies' watches, one of the few micros to offer female focused models at all to be honest, right through to big and burly offerings like the Great Wall and the Leviathan. This Narwhal is also on the larger size, larger I think than the on-paper dimensions suggest at least. I personally don't think I can pull it off on my 7-inch left wrist. I think it looks much better on my 7¼ inch right wrist, as I'll show you. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. So the Phoibos Narwhal then. If you're a fan of the brand, if you are a Phoibophile so to speak, you probably recognise this packaging already. This is their premium packaging. It's a 2-watch travel pouchy thing. You don't get this with all of their watches. You only tend to get it with a more expensive model, suggesting this new Narwhal is a more expensive model, which indeed it is. The Narwhal's available in 4 colours, all at the same price, $480 before any discounts. Like I said, there's 10% off that. Let's call it $430 then. I opted for brown. I thought it's a 70s style watch. Surely I should opt for a 70s style colour. Also available in grey. There's the blue that I used for the thumbnail today because narwhals live in the sea. And then there's the green one with gold hands and photina. It took all of my strength to resist ordering the green one with gold hands and photina, but then I remembered that I think the last 3 Phoiboses that I have reviewed have all been green and gold, so I went for brown. So then what do you get for your $430 apart from a 2-watch travel pouch and a 2-year warranty? Well, you get a big chunky 1970s style diver that I think is well made, well spec'd. It's got a high beat Japanese auto and it's rated at 300 meters rather than the standard 200 meters. But you get a watch that I think wears considerably bigger than the on-paper dimensions suggest that it wears anyway. What then, Jody, are those on-paper dimensions? Well, they measure it at 41. I measure it at 41.5 mil in diameter. I will give them credit for a watch that is a hair under 13 mil thick. That's not bad at all considering it is 300 meters. They claim 50 lug to lug. I measure it at 50.3 lug to lug, 22mm lug width, tapering down to 20, back up to 22 at the clasp. Sized up for me, 7-inch wrist. It is a chunky one today, 185 grams. All 316L stainless steel construction as you would expect. Case, crown, bezel and full stainless steel bracelet, solid end links. It's a multi-link bracelet. I'll show you that in more detail in a minute or two. These have screws, no problem adjusting them at all, and it is a proper, solid, milled upper, milled lower clasp with 3 holes of micro adjust, double security pushers, and one of several Phoibos octopi on it. Now, Phoibos claim this is domed sapphire crystal. If they had claimed it was flat sapphire crystal, I wouldn't have been arguing with them. Put it that way, the doming is so mild, it's barely noticeable. They also claim 3 layers of anti-reflective undercoating. Perhaps a few more would not have gone amiss in this case. Ceramic bezel insert. Now it is a 120 click unidirectional bezel. Bezel action is pretty good. Everything lines up as it should on this one and it does not bounce whatsoever. And that is a super 70s case profile, is it not? Utterly straight until it gets to the lugs when there is a sharp angular downturn. Now, unguarded crown with the Phoibos octopi there once more. He actually gets a bit of a break today. There are only 3 Ockies on this one rather than the customary 4. Can you guess what sea creature replaces the octopus for that 4th instance? You don't have too long to wait. Fine brushing on the mid case and on those upper lug surfaces and on the upper flat surface of the case. There is a nice high polish chamfer running from the tip of the lug end to the tip of the lug end on the other side, and it is a semi-coin edge bezel. No problems with grip, as you saw earlier on. And it is a very 1970s 9-link bracelet. Plenty of metal for your money with this one. Overall, the Narwhal, not a huge amount of articulation. It doesn't articulate like a Jubilee. There's a little bit of flex, but not too much because those links only actually pivot in one place. But as you can see from the underside, they are indeed all separate. The lug-to-lug is relatively long, over 50, but at least those end links are articulated. Case back is stainless steel, screw down and very nicely etched, featuring not an octopus, but a narwhal. Did you guess? I suspect you probably did. They are, however, rather odd-looking creatures, so I'm glad that Phoibos only put the narwhal on the back of the watch rather than the front of the watch. Now, I did mention Japanese high-beat automatic. I'm sure you've guessed already, it's a Miyota 9015. No complaints about how this one is running anyway. 24 joule hacking and hand winding as discussed, high beat, 28,800 vibrations per hour, roughly 40-hour power reserve. Now, stated tolerances on these from the factory are -10 to +30. I generally find them coming in somewhere close to +10. This one at +6 is a little bit sharper than that. The only problem with these is they only wind in one direction, so there is often an audible spinning from the rotor. However, this case is so thick and chunky you don't hear it at all in the Narwhal. So why then Narwhal? Why did Phoibos choose to name this watch after that odd-looking creature? Well, on their website they claim they call this one the Narwhal because the rough pattern of the dial on the watch matches the Narwhal's rough skin. Okay, not quite convinced by that one. I do like this scoring, I do like this etched dial patterning. I've seen it before on other watches, and all of those other watches have come from the same factory as this one. It is, by the way, the best of the micro-brand factories in my opinion. And if you quite like the look but think it might be a little bit too much for you, don't worry, it's not nearly as pronounced when viewed through the human eye as it is when viewed through the macro lens. The Oki is still on the dial though, making his third and final appearance above the pinion, automatic and 300 meters, 990 feet, printed in red beneath it. I think they got the hands and the indices just about spot on for this one. They're big and chunky, matching the overall look of the watch, with pronounced brushing on the upper surfaces, high polished chamfers on the edges, giving a little bit of extra light play, and just a touch of colour. Those little circular dots around the outer edge incorporated into the big truncated triangle at 12 and smaller truncated triangles at 3 and 9 have old radium style lume. So there is a touch of photina here, but it's not as overt as on that green and gold colour version. 6 o'clock date I think is always a good choice, keeping dial symmetry. There's a frame around that one as well. It's brushed to match the indices and the hands. The hands themselves are segmented. Nice Seiko style second hand on that one with just a touch of photina again at the tip there. And plenty of lume, as I'll show you in just a second. Now in stark contrast to the scoring and the fume, the kind of rich dial texture, the ceramic bezel insert is high polish, high gloss and very, very shiny. There is plenty of lume in that though. Let's have a look. So 15 layers of BGW9 in the hands and the indices of this one, giving that bright white glow. And as discussed, those little dots and on the tip of the second hand are all C3 old radium style, so a nice contrast. If I turn the speed up on this, you can see they weren't joking when they talked about 15 layers of both different colours. This one's still glowing very nicely at the end of the 20 minutes, which I always say is the equivalent of about 4 to 5 hours of human eye. That's it on wrist. I've got a 7-inch wrist as discussed. Plenty going on here with that high gloss ceramic bezel insert, the scored dial texture, the multifaceted hands and indices, and the multi-linked bracelet, not to mention the multiple different case finishes. So lots and lots of light play. If you are keen on one of these, you are going to have to be okay with that. As discussed in the intro though, I just don't think I've got enough wrist for it. Super flat 70s style case. There is a bit of downturn from the tips of those lugs, but I just don't feel it fits my 7-inch left wrist nearly as well as I'd like it to. It's definitely not the first watch that I've encountered then that I felt my 7¼ inch right wrist does it far more justice. So, you know, I don't tell you how to wear your watches, you pick what you fancy, but this is how I feel about this one. I reckon the bigger the better in terms of wrists. 185 grams, you know, it's a lot of watch to wear as well, but this big flat case I think suits a larger wrist rather than a smaller wrist. Overhead legibility is pretty good as well. The minute hand though I feel could have been larger. It's a big chunky watch. I'm sure they could have added a mil to the tip and perhaps just widened it slightly and it wouldn't have looked out of place on that dial. Outside natural light, once again the light plate is emphasised. Once again maybe an extra couple of layers of AR on that very vaguely domed sapphire crystal wouldn't have gone amiss. But yeah, plenty going on with the ceramic, all of those different finishes and the facets to the indices and hands as well. And as discussed, because I feel this watch sits much better on my slightly larger right wrist than it does on my slightly smaller left wrist, I'm going to show you on both of the wrists outside today. Now, despite the rather angular case and the multi-link bracelet, it's very, very comfortable, no hairs being nipped despite those 9 links, and there's a little high polish undercut to the edges of the case as well, which always helps with long-term comfort and wearability. And just like the wrist shots, here are twin pocket shots to finish. You can see I'm wearing it slightly lower and slightly looser on my left wrist, and then slightly higher, slightly tighter and slightly snugger on my right wrist. That's how I would wear a large chunky watch like this, and once again it just fits better on my slightly larger wrist. Moans and niggles, well, you know where I'm going with this one. I can't complain about the size because it's up to Phoibos how they size their watches, and hey, there are plenty of smaller than average watches aimed at guys who like smaller than average watches. So I guess this is a slightly larger than average watch aimed at guys who like slightly larger than average watches. But I can't help even then thinking that they didn't get this one quite right and it would benefit from a Narwhal version 2. Phoibos have shown that they're not averse to doing version 2s. I think they're up to version 3 of the Voyager already. I think this one would benefit from a couple of tweaks. The score dial, the multifaceted hands and those big indices are definitely 1970s, but that ceramic bezel insert could be pretty much anything. I would have loved to have seen them come up with a bespoke one just for this watch. That one looks a little bit generic in my opinion. And while we're here, Flecto. A little bit of Flecto's okay, but I would have loved a couple more layers of anti-reflective undercoating on that slightly domed sapphire crystal. The bracelet looks good, but the tolerances aren't quite what they should be. I've got a couple of stiff links here, and when I was sizing this one, I couldn't get all of the links to fit all of the links, if you see what I mean. Now that does keep it nice and tight. It'll wear well long term as a consequence, but you may have difficulties getting the links you want in the order that you want them. And much like the bezel insert, feeling a little bit generic, this clasp I'm sure I've seen on other Phoibi doesn't really suit this one, I don't think. Could do with a 4th hole of micro adjust for a start, and that big high polish edge doesn't really match the bracelet. Also, I feel it's a little bit light on. Big heavy watch head they could have done with bulking this one up just a little bit, perhaps lengthening it by a centimetre or so. My last complaint about the Phoibos Narwhal is that end link. Can't complain about the fitment, and I do appreciate the articulation, but it just doesn't look like it fits with the head of the watch. It looks like it fits with the bracelet, but the end link was designed with the bracelet in mind and not with the head of the watch in mind. All that satinized brushing doesn't really match the high polish on that angled edge of the case. Have a look at the Heinrich Tauscher by way of comparison. Very similar bracelet construction, it still has the articulation, but that end link looks like it belongs to the case and not the bracelet, which is how it should be, frankly. And while the Tauscher is here, have a look at both watches together. Both clearly 1970s style, they've both got identical case shapes, but look at the different lug-to-lug length. 50 plus on the Phoibos, 47 on the Heinrich, yet both of these watches share a 41mm diameter. The Heinrich is still going to appeal to guys who like bigger watches, but it's also going to appeal to guys who like smaller watches. The Phoibos is one for the big guys only. Phoibos tend to be a little bit hit or miss with their watch designs, and to be honest, I try to avoid the misses and I only review the stuff that I think I'm going to like. The Narwhal perhaps is neither of those, perhaps it's a maybe. I like what they're trying to do here, and I think they achieved quite a lot with the dial and hands and the bracelet construction and the shape of the case. I just don't think they quite saw it through. There are a couple of generic parts I feel that needed to be individualized, and if they were going to fully commit to a big guy watch, then they should have put a big guy clasp on this one. It's not a bad watch by any stretch, I just don't think it's quite as strong an offering as some of their Eagle Ray range, which are fantastic watches. They have shown willingness to do version 2s of watches in the past. Roll on, Narwhal V2. So there you have it, another solid and solidly made Phoibos that I think need a fairly solid wrist to wear with comfort. If this one is a little large for you, why not have a look at the Eagle Ray compressor or the Voyager. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in a future video.